All right, this is Tim, and we are back. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, and we're gonna get rolling right away. We are back with Yuri Plowden. She was gracious to mod the first virtual session, and now we have her here to talk about soil survey basics. So Yuri, with that, it is all yours.
Okay, just camera. Hi, everybody. I'm going to turn my camera off now. Can you hear me, Tim?
Yes, I hear you well.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And are you seeing my screen?
I do, I see it.
Great. Okay. So for the next half hour, we're going to talk about soil survey basics. Tuesday, I gave you a very condensed version of soils, intro to soils and basic soil properties. And so Web Soil Survey and the soil survey done by NRCS is where you can find a lot of that data. And it's the basis of a lot of the planning that you do. NRCS is the premier soils agency. And I think it's one of the best uses of taxpayer money. We have mapped almost the entire continental United States and Alaska and our other territories. And it's all digital and it's all available to the public. I don't know if there's anything else like it on the planet. So it's something that you as NRCS or as conservation professionals can be very proud of, that we have this data at your disposal. So soil survey basics, you use it to identify resource concerns and you can use it to help select conservation practices. So just a little bit about what goes into soil survey. It's not just NRCS, it's a cooperative. We didn't do it alone. We had buy-in and help from our university partners, other federal agencies, other state and local agencies, private entities, and it's lives under the NRCS Soil and Plant Science Division. And it's administered and maintained out of what we call MLRA soil survey offices. MLRA stands for Major Land Resource Areas, and I'll show you a map of that in just a bit. Oh, here we go. So here's the major land resource areas. In Pennsylvania, we have 11 that touch us. And as you might remember from my Tuesday presentation, the physiographic provinces of Pennsylvania, the MLRA regions basically mirror those. So you'll see my favorite MLRA is 147. That's the one in the middle. That's kind of tannish color. That's the Ridge and Valley. You see 140, the light blue in the northeast corner, 139 in the northwest corner. Those are the glaciated plateaus. You see the Piedmont, 148 in the southeast corner, and 127, 124, 126. Those are the Appalachian Plateaus in western PA. And there's a few other small ones that also are in Pennsylvania. So some soil survey acronyms that you'll see out there. SURGO, you'll hear about our SURGO database. That stands for Soil Survey Geographic Database, and that is the digital soils data. SURGO is the most detailed. So when you're making your plan maps, you are using SURGO data. There's also a little bit less detailed called StatsGo, and there's NATSCO, data, which is a very general soil map of the entire United States. And StatsGo and NATSCO have been used a lot for modeling when they're modeling big areas and they need some soils data. That's where those databases come in handy a lot. NASIS stands for our National Soil Information System. That's where all the tabular data lives. When you bring up a soil survey report and you have your K factors and your rock fragments and your depth to water table, that's all lives in NASIS. And then it's all combined and delivered in Web Soil Survey, which I talked about that, and we'll look at that a little more. If you're not familiar with Web Soil Survey, I would get familiar with it. It's an amazing database. So soils, there's a goal that by 2026, the Soil Survey Division has this goal to complete the entire, what they call initial soil survey. So that's so that every single acre will be mapped. Right now, the most remote, non-agricultural areas are the ones that still are left to be mapped. I think there's a lot of area in Alaska and some of our big national parks. So here's the Pennsylvania NRCS Soils GIS staff. And you'll get this presentation, but and I'll show you a map. So it's composed myself and the area resource soil scientists for the Southeast, the West, and the Northeast. And then we have an urban conservationist soil scientist who currently is based in Leesport, but he will eventually be based in Philadelphia when our new office there opens. And we have our GIS specialist, who all of you know, Marcy Dunn, and most of you, I'm sure all of you know Tony Anastasi too, the State Business Tools Coordinator. But then soil survey data in Pennsylvania, we do not control that within state. So we have our soil survey offices. The only one that's located in Pennsylvania is Mill Hall. Some of you may know Chris Seitz if you're there at Mill Hall. And then Morgantown, West Virginia, Frederick, Maryland, Marietta, Ohio, and Belmont, New York are responsible for soils data in Pennsylvania, for better or for worse. The states used to control it all, and then they went to this MLRA model, and now it's kind of split up. So here's the technical soil service areas. So there again, so you see Tyson, Keith, John, and then Kafeni there in the Southeast doing the urban stuff. And this map and information was in one of the PA Weekly news updates. And if you would like this map, I can send it to you. All right, so soil survey basics. If you recall, okay, test. Can anybody type in the chat, what are the 5 soil forming factors? Because that is what we use. That's what the Soil Survey Division uses when they're mapping soils. Can folks, and I can't see the chat, so someone's going to have to, oh wait, maybe I can. Yeah, I can bring it up. Somebody type in the chat, what are the 5 soil forming factors? See if you remember from our intro. Uh-oh, I see that slides not changing for some people.
I see soil survey basics. Is that the slide you want us on?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Good. Okay.
Changing. It might be an isolated issue.
Okay. Okay, I see CLORPed. Yep. So climate, organisms, relief, parent material, and time. Yep, I see climate, organic material. Yep. Okay. So a field soil scientist will take those 5 soil forming factors and they can actually delineate different kinds of soils across the landscape. So the idea with the soil forming factors is that soils formed under similar soil forming factors will behave the same or similarly across the landscape, and that they are mappable. And so you can take those 5 soil forming factors, delineate your soils, and then predict the soil behavior for different land uses. And you can also highlight limitations and hazards. So these are all things that are captured in the soil survey. Oops. All right, let's see if okay. Slide switched. I hope you guys see the slide switched. So the most basic level, and the one that you're all probably most familiar with, is soil series. So these are the most basic groupings of soils, and these have similar horizons and characteristics. So this landscape model, what I'm showing you here is that you have a landscape, and within that landscape, you have a special combination of the 5 soil forming factors, probably most likely relief. And then within that, so then you can delineate out that area, and then within that area, it's made up of several polypedons, and then we describe one pedon, and that's what goes into the soil, the map unit description for that soil series. So here again, I'm a Ridge and Valley gal, so these are all Ridge and Valley soils: Berks, Brinkerton, Hagerstown, Hazleton, Holly, Waker. You might be in Gilpin land or Manor, Mount Airy land, or Volusia, Marden, something like that. Those are all classic Pennsylvania soils from different areas. All right, so each delineation on the soil survey map is called a map unit, and that's the basic unit of the soils map. And delineation boundaries are drawn wherever there is a significant change in the type of soil. So that might be slope, a change in slope going from an A to a B slope. It might be color, drainage, parent material, or some significant change in vegetation that is suggestive that something in the soil has shifted, and that's why you have a different vegetation community. So map unit design is a lot of it's based on the landscape position, because in any given area, you're going to have the same climate, you're going to have the same, you may or may not have the same vegetation, but and you may or may not have the same parent material, but the thing that's definitely going to change is where you are on that landscape. So they typically follow the landform. So here in this block diagram, you can see that the Berks soils are on these ridge tops and summits, and the Weichert is on these convex shoulders. Let's see, I don't know if I can do my, don't know if I can do my pointer on this. And then the Beddington soils are on the side slopes. And then down in the concave valleys along the streams, you'll get the Holly. The Brinkerton is at the base of the slope. And then you'll have like up, it's kind of partially covered by the text, but you'll have a Kleinsville over here. And that's similar to a Berks. But that is a different parent material. It's red shale, whereas Berks and Weichert are yellows and brown shales. So in the soil survey legend, you have each map unit is named a different soil series, and it'll have the percent slope and some other descriptive characteristic. And so map units, one thing to take home, if there's nothing else that you remember from my presentation today, other than to use Web Soil Survey, is that map units are not 100% pure, because as we all know, almost intuitively, soils are very variable on the landscape. If you walk and poke a hole down every 10 feet for 100 feet, you're probably going to hit different things as you go. But what we do is they're broken up into major components and minor components. And so the soil series that takes up the most room, like 50, 60% or more, is considered a major component. And the minor components usually make up 15% or less. And if you have a soil, you may have a soil that's very similar to the major component, but maybe it's a different color or slightly different textures, but it still interprets the same way. They're going to throw that all in as the part of the major component. So here is an example of what you'll find in the map unit description on Web Soil Survey. It'll name, this is a BKB, Berks Channery Silt Loam, 3 to 8% slopes. And it'll tell you that Berks and similar soils are 85% of that map unit, and the minor components make up 15%. And one of the minor components is Weichert. And so the difference between Berks and Weichert is Berks is a moderately deep soil. You'll have bedrock occurring within 20 to 40 inches of the surface, whereas Weichert, less than within 10 to 20 inches, you'll have bedrock. So that's the difference. And they sometimes you'll have a map unit name that's composed of 2 soil series, like a Berks and Weichert silt loam, 3 to 8% slopes. And what that means is that the Berks and the Weichert almost always occur together, but they may occur at, it may be that at that scale of mapping, you can't break it out, because otherwise your map would get too busy. So they throw it all together and call it a Berks-Weichert complex. And there's other different types of map unit components that I won't go into, but in Pennsylvania, most of our map unit components are what we call consociations, where you just have one main soil named in the map unit name, or they may be complexes where you have 2 or more soil series named in the name. And this came, this was an important concept because I just got a call 2 days ago from a DC, and he was looking at a farm field, and it was mapped Mount Airy.
Yuri, you went muted there.
Oops. How did that happen? How long have I been muted?
When you said Mount Airy, that was the last thing I heard.
Oh, that's weird. It just muted on its own. It didn't like me. It just it censored me right away.
Didn't want to hear about that Mount Airy soil like that.
So Manor, I believe, is a deep soil, and Mount Airy is a shallow soil, and they have two very different T factors. I think the Manor has a T of 5, and the Mount Airy has a T of 2. So if you're running Russell, which do you choose? How do you make that decision? Any ideas? Anyway, what he said was, if he goes out and augers down a hole and he gets, 30 to 40 inches before he hits any kind of resistance, can he call that a Manor soil? And I said yes. In fact, that's the ideal thing, would be to go and actually dig a hole and determine what series, if you have a map unit that's named two different series, which series do you have? And that helps you. And Mark Goodson may have some other, maybe there are other protocols. If you can't get to the field, maybe you should just use the more restrictive T factor. But ideally, yes, go to the field. And when it's a complex like that, figure out what you have. All right, let's see if I can change the slide without muting myself. Okay. All right. So so here, once you can delineate an area of interest in Web Soil Survey, and you'll come up with this legend. And on the left, these are live links that if you click on any of these, you'll get that to that map unit description like this that we had before. And I hope that my changing back and forth doesn't mess people up who are online. So when you print out that map, you will get a map information page, like with the information on the right. This stuff is very important. And it's stuff that usually we ignore because we just want the map and we just want the soil series and the description. But this gives you a lot of information. So it tells you that what scale of mapping that map was created at. In this case, it was 1 to 15,800. Can anybody tell me what that scale means? So if 1 to 15,800, what does that mean? Somebody either want to say it out loud or put it in the chat. I'll give you a hint. The 1 means, like, let's say 1 inch. What does the 15,800 mean? Okay. I'm gonna wait because this is important. Scale of mapping is important. Somebody want to take a chance? Okay, Paul, yes. So what it means is that 1 inch on the map. Okay, we have 1 inch equals 15,800. Yes, that is exactly what it means. Yes, Jason, and what it means is 1 inch on the map is equivalent to 15,800 inches on in real life. So that's what that means. And it could be 1 foot on the map if you have a huge map, and so 1 foot on the paper map then would be equivalent to 15,800 feet. But it's a ratio. And so often, and we'll show that on the next slide, we tend to zoom in too far beyond what it was made for. But the other information on this map is it tells you the source of the coordinate system. So for you GIS nerds, it tells you that kind of stuff. And it'll give you a warning if you're zoomed in too far, too closely beyond the scale at which the thing was mapped. And it tells you the version. So under there, it says Soil Survey Area, Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. And then it tells you the version. So this was version 15, and this data was last updated September 19th, 2018. So this presentation's been floating around a while because now we update the data every year. But that's where you can see what version of data you have. And so that's also important, right? Because let's say you made a plan, a conservation plan, run Russell back in 2018, and now the farmer wants to bring another piece of land into production. You run your Russell on the latest map, 2022 data, and maybe the information has changed a little bit. And that's because they are always updating the underlying tabular data. So this will tell you what year that map was produced at. And then it'll give you the date of the aerial photography. So that's also important. So you bring out the Web Soil Survey map and you say, wait a minute, I know there's a new barn there. Where is it? And that's because sometimes the aerial photography that they use in Web Soil Survey is not the latest and greatest. So here's where they've zoomed way in and you actually get this message on Web Soil Survey that says soil may not be valid at this scale. And so what that just means is these lines, it seems like these are very precise lines, but they really aren't. It's just between the projection of the GIS that you're using and then the scale of mapping. So just meaning take it with a grain of salt. Web Soil Survey is an excellent tool, but it's a blunt, broad instrument used for larger scale, like field-wide, farm-wide planning, but not site point data. And so just to pound the idea of map scale into your heads a little bit more. So for example, what it means is this soil survey was mapped when the polygons were originally drawn by the field soil scientist. It was mapped at the 1 to 15,840 scale. So that means the smallest polygon was 2.5 acres. The smallest map unit delineation there was 2.5 acres. And so often, if we zoom in further, if we zoom down to where we're only seeing like 2 or 3 acres on our map, then we're going to just see like one map unit polygon. And obviously there's a lot of variability within that 2.5 acres. But that's if they did it at that scale, because at that time the maps were printed on paper and the maps were still readable when they were mapped at that scale. Okay, so where do you get soils information? There's several really great places to get soils information that are available to us as NRCS. So we have on the top left, the Field Office Tech Guide. If you navigate to Pennsylvania and to, I believe it's section 2, you can get to soils information on Field Office Tech Guide. The bottom left are the paper copy soil surveys. Those are out of date. Do not use those for conservation planning. They are not the official soils data anymore. But if you have paper copies, don't throw them away because they have all kinds of information that the modern online version no longer has. So don't throw them away. Read through them sometime. They'll talk about the geology. They'll talk about the economics of the county. They're really valuable, got a lot of good information, but they're not the official data anymore. The official data now lives in Web Soil Survey, and that's this website that we depicted on the top right of your screen. And then the other place where you can get official soils data is on SoilWeb. Now, this is an app that was developed out of UC Davis, University of California, Davis, and they link right to Web Soil Survey data. So SoilWeb is our latest data. And the beauty of SoilWeb is you can either do it online or you can download it as an app on your phone, and you can bring it up, and in real time, it will locate you in the field with a map, with the soils, and you can know exactly what soil you're standing on in real time out in the field. Very cool app. So then, of course, another place that you guys are uber familiar with is Conservation Desktop, and there's the Soils Map and Report. Of course, I've been seeing the messages from Marcy that the map making thing isn't, the creating the maps is not working very well in desktop right now. But you can create your soils map in desktop, it's less than 16.5. I think that is still correct. And lesson 20.1 shows you how to export land use units or practices to a shapefile. And then what you can do is you can take that shapefile that you make in CART and import it into Web Soil Survey and get a whole lot more reports. And that is the subject of, I think, the next Lunch and Learn that's 2 weeks from now. So you use the soil survey to identify resource concerns, potential resource concerns, and the suitability of the soils for different conservation practices. So right from your office, there's some things that you can determine. You can determine, are you on steep land? You can look at what's the soil stability. You can get an idea of soil permeability. Does it flood or pond? Is there a seasonal high water table? What's the soil depth? And is it hydric or non-hydric? And of course, you want to follow up in the field, because again, remember at the scale of mapping, it might not be fully accurate, and also it's a blend instrument. It's not site specific, but it'll give you a really good overall idea of the landscape. So Web Soil Survey, you go in and there are many ways you can navigate. You can either type in your lat and long, which you can get from a GPS or from Google Earth, Google Maps, or you can type in the address directly and it'll come up with a point on the map. Then you draw your area of interest. So there's a thing called the area interest tab, and you'll draw a square around that, and then it'll come up with a soil map. Okay. So here's just going to Field Office Tech Guide. Here's in section 2, if you wanted to look at the highly erodible soil lists that are used to make the highly erodible land determinations, they are in Field Office Tech Guide. There's also the LISA data if you're interested in Farmland Protection Policy Act or farmland preservation. You have somebody that calls in asking for that. They can go to the LISA values in Field Office Tech Guide. And then what we've done for you is in the soils information, if you go to soil data download, if you click on that, you'll get a list of every single county in Pennsylvania. And when you click on that, the area of interest will already be defined for you in Web Soil Survey for that county. Okay, I am going to skip through some of these because you'll get this presentation and it'll be a good reference. So here's again the soil web display. And then, okay, here's another source of soils data, the priority resource inventory map, which I understand that some of you, especially the newer planners, really like and appreciate, and the more experienced ones, think it's just one more thing to print out and throw in the folder. But what the priority resource inventory map does is it'll show you can bring up a whole bunch of things all at once. You can bring up whether or not it's hydric soils. You can bring up whether you're near a exceptional valley stream, if there's any like bog turtle or other planned practices within a certain mile radius. And what I like is that it can also show you concentrated flow lines. We don't see any in this map, but it'll show you where you're going to most likely see gullies and erosion. And that's important when conservation planning. And so the priority resource inventory map lives on the server in each county. There's an ArcMap project ready to go. And usually I think the program assistant will generate the map of the tract or the farm for you, and you'll have the priority resource inventory map that way. So here's where I was talking about Web Soil Survey. You can create your AOI actually from a zipped shapefile. So you can export a zipped shapefile from desktop and then import it into Web Soil Survey. So why would you want to do that? Well, because you can generate one of these for your landowner. It's like a mini soil survey just for them. and you can put all kinds of information in there. So you can generate a report for the farmland classification, for the hydric rating, for the non-irrigated capability class. And here are the different maps. And I'm just going to talk about one more map and then wrap it up. Let me go through here. Okay, this is a map I want to talk about, farmland classification. And this is, it'll tell you, this map, which areas of the farm are prime farmland and which aren't. I think that's on your CPA 52, right? Right. A lot of these things I'm going over are part of that NEPA evaluation. And so the legend for the farmland classification map has all these different classifications. And I'll tell you right now that in Pennsylvania, we don't have a lot of those. In Pennsylvania, we have stuff that's not prime farmland. We have soils that are prime farmland. We have a very few areas of prime farmland if drained. We don't have any of these flooding, irrigating stuff. And we do have lots of farmland of statewide importance. And we have some farmland of local and unique importance, like I'm thinking of the grape growing regions in the northwest part of the state. And also different counties may want some of their better soils to be classified as farmland of local importance in order to qualify them for some of the farmland protection. And so you can get a map, you can get a table. This is a very useful table. You can get your hydric soils map and a bunch of other reports. So basically the rest of this is just showing different reports that are available. There's soil health properties that are now available. This was composting facility. So when avian influenza broke out, we made sure we had this surface composting interpretation available. Building site development. And part of the AOI inventory is getting that map unit description. And I am going to stop it right there so that just lots and lots of reports. So I would definitely encourage you to go into Web Soil Survey, play around. If you need help and can't find your way around, or you're looking for a particular report, you can always contact me and I can help you navigate through it. So that's all I have.
All right, Yuri. Well, we have a poll to launch. I'm gonna launch it right now. And true or false, soil map units are 100% pure, made up of only one soil series. So go ahead and answer that, and I'll also copy the image and put it in the chat. Yuri, I think we're getting lots of responses.
Yay! I think it's looking pretty good. I'm seeing the chat. I'm seeing the response to the poll. And you guys are correct. Yes, the one thing I wanted you to get out of this was that soil map units are not pure. And that's why Soil Survey is a wonderful, incredible tool to help you with your planning and part of your inventory gathering. But you still need to go on site. You still need to go on site and verify what that soil really is. And we will be doing that, particularly in Boot Camp 2. So next year, we'll be going to sites and you'll be verifying the soil survey. And but you'll be looking at stuff next week and the week of May 1st also. Thank you.
Right. Any questions for Yuri? All right, there's nothing in the chat. Thanks a lot, Yuri, and we're going to hear from Yuri again later. So our next presentation is going to cover Introduction to Fish and Wildlife, and our presenter is Beth Sassaman. Beth is our acting state biologist right now. So Beth, are you on? And if you are, it's all yours.
I'm here. Can you hear me and can you see the slides?
I can do both, loud and clear, and we see it well.
Okay, great. So we're gonna have an introduction to Fish and Wildlife and talk about why we have to evaluate fish and wildlife in our planning policy. So our objectives today are to understand why fish and wildlife concerns are considered, understand the importance of wildlife, and to begin to shift our viewpoint in the agricultural landscape and see the different systems that work together. So wildlife has a value, but that value varies depending on a person's viewpoint, just like any other resource concern that we're looking at. Um, we hear, why should we even think about wildlife on a farm if it's not one of the farmer's objectives? So the answer to that question is, we have to consider wildlife because it's a public resource. So it's included with water and air. And why do we do that? Why is it not the landowner's property? It's because of our history. So in Europe, wild game was the property of the landowner, and unauthorized use of that property was punishable by a crime. But in the United States, the land, vegetation, and domestic animals are private property, but fish and wildlife are public property and are managed by the state, like Pennsylvania, the Game Commission, and the Fish and Boat Commission. So as a result, we have laws that oversee fish and wildlife as a public resource, and NRCS is required to consider wildlife at all times, not just when it's something that the cooperator is looking to address. These laws include NEPA, the Water Pollution Control Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. So if you look at the 52 form, there are places that we are required to inventory and address wildlife. So that includes a threatened and endangered species section of the 52 of the NEPA portion, as well as migratory birds. And then we also look at the planning criteria, which includes aquatic and terrestrial wildlife habitat. So the landowner and the laws may not have the same objective. And we look at it when we talk about manure. The farmer needs to spread manure because their pit is full. But the law says you can't spread manure at certain times because we're protecting water quality and we're protecting the public benefit. And also wetlands. We often, and we did historically, drain wetlands to get more land to graze or crop. And the laws changed that to protect wetland functions because of the public benefits that they provide for water quality, infiltration, and flood control. So, like I said before, we have to consider wildlife because it's a public resource, just like water and air. So, what is farmland wildlife? So certainly we don't need to evaluate every, we're not really thinking about every species that occurs in Pennsylvania, but those species that we do see a lot on farmland are wildlife that lives in open, non-forested areas. A lot of our grassland species and some of our edge species. So some of the fastest declining wildlife groups nationally are grassland birds, which have seen a 60% decline over the last 40 years. So why is farmland wildlife declining? So we have to look at it sort of two ways. There is the natural occurrences and the unnatural. Predators and diseases are natural occurrences. We often say that we don't have wolves or many coyotes or mountain lions to control deer. And diseases also, we look at chronic wasting disease for deer, the avian influenza for birds. And those are our natural, always commonly occurring things. The unnatural is the large scale habitat loss and also use of pesticides. If you've heard stories about bald eagle decline in the 60s from the use of DDT and how the banning of that pesticide helped their population tremendously, that's the kind of situation that we're talking about when we're saying unnatural. And also land clearing and development is that large scale habitat loss. So when we look at predators, we call this the hawks and foxes syndrome. This is a predator and prey relationship. If anybody has had biology and looked at, or ecology and looked at the graphs of predator and prey cycles, they go up and down naturally. So certainly sometimes there is not enough prey to go around, and then the population declines. And as prey increases, the population increases. It's a the directly related relationship. And also predators are wildlife too. and even predators are food for other predators as well. Then we talk about diseases. We think of rabies. We think of the highly pathogenic avian influenza that we're seeing now, chronic wasting disease, West Nile virus, those sorts of diseases that are out there and we are concerned with when we go onto farms. They have less effect on wildlife than we typically believe in them when we see on farms. When we see an issue with poultry flocks and the influenza, it affects all the birds because they're all in one small area. Where in most cases, the wildlife are more dispersed, so there's less transmission, so there's less decline as a result of those kinds of diseases. And rabies is the same thing. We see rabies, there are positive reports of rabies in wildlife regularly, but it doesn't cause any widespread population decline. And we talk about pesticides. Typically with wildlife, it's indirect. So it's not killing the wildlife themselves, but it's affecting the plants or insects that they're feeding on. And it also can transfer to those species as they eat their prey or the plants that have absorbed those pesticides. But also not in any widespread way. So what really comes down to is large-scale habitat loss, and certainly these other things are concerns, but they're manageable. But large-scale habitat loss is probably the number one reason why we're losing those farmland wildlife. So what do we need to consider when we're evaluating wildlife in our planning process? So all wildlife need food, cover, and water. And they need all three of those, but typically in Pennsylvania, water is readily available. But they have to have them all available throughout the entire year. So this is why some species migrate. We see large-scale migrations of birds of prey and songbirds in the fall because their food is declining because of the seasonality of them. So they move, a lot of them go to the tropics where food is readily available. And when food starts to become more available in their home range, they move back. So this is a chart of how throughout the seasons, the different resources that are available. So like I said before, when you get into the fall and winter, the food and cover decline, which causes species to move to get to a place where those resources are available. So if we take a look at this picture, even a harvested crop field has more cover sometimes of year than others. So if you see the fodder here is in September is still available, so there's still some cover, but in October, as it rots and maybe is chopped and away, it's gone. So there is no place to hide. So when you're talking about wildlife, vegetation or habitat is the key. So vegetation is that cover, it's protection from predation. And so that's what is most important. And a lot of our wildlife practices really focus on habitat. When I first started working for NRCS, we had a fellow from the Game Commission that always said, habitat isn't everything, it's the only thing. And it's really true when we're talking about farmland wildlife, because if they don't have habitat, they're not going to survive and they're going to need to move on elsewhere. So what do we do on farmland to impact vegetation? How do we manage for wildlife and the conservation practices that we use? So some options are using crop rotation for both food and cover, residues for food and cover crops, and food plots, all for food and cover. And then long-term vegetation like buffers and also interspersion. So breaking up the habitat quite a bit. And if you look at the WEG form that we use to evaluate wildlife habitat, that is a large portion of it is looking at distance to cover and how large the field is and where an interrupted cover is. So when we're looking at crop rotations, more diverse rotation is always better for wildlife. And again, you'll see that on the WEG form if you go through it. The more species, if there's cover crops, the more time that there's cover on the ground, the better it is for wildlife. And it also, as it increases cover, there's also increased food available as well. Then there's crop residues. Even though we talk about crop residues when it comes to soil erosion and soil health, but it's also important for wildlife. A lot of times I'll see horned larks and other grassland winter birds coming through and foraging in those low crop residues. And then there's also cover crops. Cover crops are great for all sorts of reasons, and these are also practices that we talk about all the time just in our cropland systems when we're not talking about wildlife. And it also provides food and cover during the time of year that there isn't much. Then there's food plots and other cropping activities. So, food plots is often a choice that people make because they're interested in wildlife, perhaps part of a CSP contract, or just because they like to hunt or bird watch. So that certainly is a beneficial practice, and also adjusting the cropping activities to like delayed harvest or not harvest anything at all for a portion of the field, maybe on a field border edge or something like that. That also provides food and wildlife, food and habitat for wildlife. So here's an example. Although everyone just ate lunch, but imagine that you didn't. And your options today are a bowl of iceberg lettuce or a bowl of mixed greens with carrots, tomatoes, broccoli, sunflower seeds, eggs, bacon bits, and croutons, maybe some dressing and maybe some other carbs with it. What would you choose and why? So not everyone's here. I mean, I can't see anyone, but I would expect that everyone would choose the more variety than the iceberg lettuce. You can certainly comment if you feel differently. Thanks, Tim. And which would benefit you more. So if you're talking about a salad, you're getting more nutrients from that variety of food. And when you talk about human diet, we also see that, they don't ever want to hear, when I take my kids to the doctor, they don't want to hear that all they do is eat chicken fingers and French fries every day. They ask about fruits and vegetables and milk and those sorts of things. So then we talk about vegetation type, and perennial plants offer more benefits than annual plants do, than regular crops, because it's long term. And typically we are going to recommend native species over non-native species. So typically for grasses, we're looking at warm season grasses as opposed to cool season grasses like orchard grass and timothy. We're looking at Indian grass, switchgrass, big blue stem. They just provide more habitat for the species that are adapted for Pennsylvania. And so you certainly would want to be, if you were wildlife, you'd like to be around the plants that you sort of, I'll say, grow up with, but that you're adapted for. So that is always, if we're looking at wildlife, we want more native species than non-native species, but any cover is better than no cover. Then the interspersion, and I was talking about this before. We talk about having cover and not having cover. So if you're a small mammal out in the field on top and there is a hawk flying overhead, they're going to be able to see you and there is nowhere to hide. If you're a small mammal in the lower field, while it's far to those tree patches, there are places where you can get cover and hide from predators. And also the elements too, when you have winter storms and things like that. That cover is helpful. There are also species that hibernate, and they hibernate not in the middle of a field, but in those dense covers. We look at bog turtles, which aren't really on cropland, but when they hibernate under roots of woody plants. So even though those turtles really like open emergent wetlands, they also need some root balls to hide under, to hibernate, so that they have protection from both the winter and also predation. So here's another example. This is maybe a better example for folks. Imagine if you have donuts on a table in the back of a meeting room, and there are 6 donuts in the back, and there are 6 hidden around the room. Which donuts are going to be eaten first, and which ones might not be eaten immediately, might survive the whole day. And I'm expecting that if people walk into a room and they see donuts on a plate, they're going to eat those as opposed to those that are hidden under the table. So if all the resources are used up early in the season, then they don't have anything to get them through the winter, which is also a problem for wildlife. I mean, we have not had some terribly harsh winters in Pennsylvania lately, but the resources drop, and if the food is all gone, there's nothing to sustain them. So I hope you can see this this diagram. But we have to look at the landscape when we're writing a conservation plan, is where wildlife habitat fits in with the cropping system. And I don't think anyone's saying that we need to set aside land for wildlife. When I started with NRCS, we used to set aside an acre of wildlife in an EQIP contract. It was always a hard sell. But here we're looking at where can you incorporate it into the system where it works together. We're not looking at wildlife taking over the plan or being the primary reason we're planning, but where can we fit habitat into the system? So this diagram has, there's windbreaks in this picture, there's forested riparian buffer, there's a wetland, there are filter strips of perennial grass waterways. These things are all typical practices that you see on a cropland system, but they are beneficial to wildlife. We use the CREP program quite a bit in Pennsylvania to establish wildlife habitat in both buffer situations, but also upland grassland situations as well. Now that is set aside, but a lot of the practices that are available can be incorporated right into the existing crop system. Contour buffer strips, or like I said, a forested riparian buffer, filter strips. These practices are very beneficial to wildlife and are small. They don't take up a lot of land, and all farmers really want to farm as much land as they can because that's where their profits are coming from. So it's just about just kind of a mindset shift and looking at where it fits into the whole system. So these are the practices that we really look at for wildlife benefits, and they also are affecting other things. So we're planning crop rotation anyway for soil erosion and soil health. We're leaving residues for the same thing, and nutrient management. We're also looking to affect water quality. So these resource concerns are often things that we think about and we talk to farmers about all the time. So wildlife fits right in there because it's not a new and different thing. It really is integrated into this whole system. And then ultimately, what are we planning for? What's the farmer in it for? He's in it for profitability. So that's they're trying to make their business work, and so that is important. So we know that these practices are good for lots of things. So if we tweak them just a little bit, they'll work for wildlife too. So you can change the system just a little bit, and like I referred to that WEG form a few times. If you look at it, it's pretty simple to get that score up if you just make a few small changes. Extending cover crop or delaying mowing or making the field smaller. Those things will help increase that score and also improve wildlife habitat, I guess, which is this score is indicating. So to wrap it up, we want to understand why fish and wildlife, why we have to consider fish and wildlife. And like I said earlier, it's a public resource, and the state really does regulate it, and we're required by law to evaluate it and to not cause detriment. Then understand resource concerns that are important to wildlife. So food, cover, and water were the three things they need. And then to look at the agricultural landscape as an interaction of many systems that can complement each other and serve multiple purposes. So we went over a bunch of conservation practices or ideas that would integrate into a conservation plan nicely. And that's really what you're wanting to do is have this mindset shift that wildlife are out there anyway. What can be done on a very small changes that can increase wildlife habitat and diversity. So I think that's all I have. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them, and you can always email me if you have more.
Thanks a lot, Beth. We have a poll question. I'm gonna put it in the chat and then I'll launch the poll once it loads. Bear with me. The question is, true or false, wildlife in Pennsylvania is owned by the private landowners? Lots of responses coming in, Beth.
Wait for them.
Whoops. Either we're all right or we're all wrong.
Yes, everybody's right. It is false. It is a public resource, and I probably said it about 20 times. So, good job, everybody.
Very good. Hey, thanks a lot, Beth.
Sure.
I don't see any questions in the chat. So with that, we'll roll into our next presentation. We are going to be hearing from Mary Lynn Marks for the first time. Mary Lynn is our NRCS state economist, and she's been with NRCS in Pennsylvania. I don't know, well, she can tell you that, but I would guess probably at least a year at this point. And she's going to talk to us about working with landowners and farmers. So Mary Lynn, take it away.
Hello, here, let me share my screen here. Let me see if we can get this out here. Okay, can y'all hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you, or see the
Great.
screen.
All right, see the screen? Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you, Tim. My name is Mary Lynn Marks. I am the agricultural economist for Pennsylvania. Tim, you're right. I have been here a year this week, which is crazy. Yeah, I've really enjoyed being here. And I'm really excited to talk today about working effectively with landowners. Oh, is it gonna click? No. Okay, there we go. So today's objective, we're going to go over understanding kind of the average landowner. We'll look at some demographics data, how to present oneself effectively and appropriately, and being proactive before communication even takes place, and ensuring that the producer's objectives and position are fully considered and respected. Some of this is kind of to be expected. I don't think anything today is going to be too crazy, but just some great things to remember. And a lot of this comes from a document that was produced in NRCS a few years ago called Working Effectively with Private Landowners. So just some good things to remember, and hope y'all get a lot out of it today. So communicating with landowners, just kind of like up front. So we interact with landowners quite a bit in NRCS, as I think we consider ourselves people who are really tied to working outside, working with the land, but it really is also working with people, and it's constant. I think sometimes is not maybe what we consider first things first, but it is something that we do on a regular basis, and it can occur in quite a few ways. So this can occur foremost as correspondence, so can look like phone calls, emails, and maybe if you get to a relationship with your landowner over text, that's becoming more popular as we, I don't know, progress. And this can also occur at the office. Maybe a landowner comes in, needs to sign paperwork, has a question. There's really no way to tell. Could happen anytime. Of course, on the farm visit, when you go to see the operation and get to talk to the landowner about any conservation that you hope to be doing in the future with them. And then I also put events on here. I know in my year at NRCS, I've had the opportunity to interact with the public at quite a few events, at Ag Progress Days, at the Farm Show a few months ago. And I would highly encourage you to do that as well. They're great volunteering opportunities, and they're a great way to kind of talk to not just landowners with working with NRCS directly, but also people who are just interested in NRCS and really about kind of telling people what we do. And yeah, I would highly encourage it. But anyway, so this can happen in quite a few places. So something that we need to remember, that it's not just when we show up to the farm, it's really something that happens pretty consistently. So kind of switching gears here. So these are some interesting statistics that I got from the National Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS. But looking at Pennsylvania farm operations in 2021, that was our last survey. There's 139 farm acres per farm in operation on average in Pennsylvania, with almost 53,000 farms in operation and just about 7.3 million acres. So we're a pretty agriculturally dense state. I'm sure quite a few of you are from Pennsylvania. I'm not. I actually moved here, so it's been really fun to learn kind of all the ag that Pennsylvania has to offer and how diverse it is. And looking at the US as a whole, and this is also heavily represented in Pennsylvania, 89% of all farms are considered small family farms. And I know that's pretty relative, but those are considered by ERS, the Economic Research Service, to be those that are making less than 350,000 in gross cash farm income. So that's before expenses. That's pure revenue is how much they're bringing in. So I mean, that's the vast majority. So really, when we're out here talking to landowners and decision makers, it's important to remember that quite a few of them are making, pretty heavy business decisions with a very limited amount of resources. It's all something that they have to consider, and it's all going to make a big difference when it's on this scale. So something to consider, and just some interesting graphs here for you. And then looking at the modern Pennsylvania farmer, so I looked at kind of what has happened in the U.S. and Pennsylvania, changes from 2012 to 2017. So we had a bit of a producer downshift. Actually, there was a few less producers, about 100, so not a huge difference, probably not even statistically significant, from 2012 to 2017. So we can say relatively stagnant. We don't see a lot of increase in producers. We do see a gender shift, which is interesting. Went from 70% men, 30% women in 2012 to 65% men, 35% women in 2017. So I'll be interested to see when the latest set of data comes out, maybe later. I think they're still doing survey responses. So maybe later this year, next year, how this data looks for, I guess that'll be 2022's numbers. And then almost half of these, or less than half, I'm sorry, less than half of producers primarily farm. So that's their main occupation. So that means over 50% of producers that were surveyed have an occupation that they put before farming. So that means that, they're really making farming a priority, but they still have to they have to have an additional occupation in order to make it work. So this is really something that's probably near and dear to their hearts. 83, oh, sorry. Oosh. It's my Apple Watch. 83% do live on the farm. So the vast majority of people, this isn't just a business for them. This is really their home. So also something that, would really be important to remember when we come in and we're invited on these landscapes, that they're not necessarily just making business decisions. They're really making decisions for kind of their home life as well. Over about 74% of producers have been operating a farm for over 10 years. So we say it all the time, but no one knows the operation as well as the operator. So really important to remember when we're talking to producers about decisions and decision making when it comes to conservation or anything at all, that they are going to have opinions for sure, because they've been working their land longer than anyone. And the average operator age is about 55. So maybe going to be a little set in their ways, especially if they have been operating for a while. And the vast majority of them are white. So just some demographics to remember, just interesting. So going off of that, so landowners are often going to be experienced. So they're going to have opinions, and they're going to have opinions about your opinions. They're going to place a lot of significance in their operation. It's a major asset for them. We talk about all the time, but farming is a business, so they want to make sure it remains profitable. They want to remain sure it becomes an avid resource. It's a home for many of them, and for many of them, it's a family. It's something that they maybe want to pass on to their kids, their grandkids. So something that they want to remain sustainable, and continue to be active over time. I put it in there. I always think it's a good idea. Golden rule. Um, we wouldn't want somebody to approach us about our own business or our own home and kind of tell us what to do, but approach it and really try to make it something that adds value and something that would be kind of helpful to what is going on. So keeping that in mind, treat everybody the way you would like to be treated, talk to people the way you would want to be talked to. Build a relationship with everyone. I know Dan, I believe, mentioned this on Tuesday. I haven't heard a lot of today's presentations, but I know I heard it Tuesday, if it's been repeated. But you never really know who the decision maker is. You might think you do, but you might not for certain. So it's always good to, be kind to everyone, be respectful to everyone, and try to build a relationship with everyone, being persistent and knowing that it does take time. Nobody trusts anyone completely off the get-go. They want to know that you know what you're talking about. They want to know that you're there for the right reasons. And if you show up consistently and show them that, they're much more likely to be receptive and open to what you're trying to tell them. Going off of that, being present, just making sure that you're really there with them. You're not thinking about, what you have to do after work, what you have to do when you get back to the office, what you have to do for lunch. I know that's really hard. I know I struggle with that, where, sometimes things outside of work come into work, but really making sure that when we're there with the landowner, we're really focusing on that landowner and that landowner alone. So when we're on a farm visit, we're looking around, we're talking to landowners. First and foremost, being really clear and simple with our language and avoiding NRCS speak. I know as somebody who's been here for a year, I am still caught off guard sometimes where someone will say something and I will have no idea what is going on. And then, you ask a question or two and you realize, but, these farmers, they're going to be much more receptive to what you have to say and what you have to offer to them if they know what you're talking about. If we come in and we throw around the adjective or the acronyms and the abbreviations, it's going to be a big turnoff, pretty much off the get-go. So just kind of keeping that in the mind, in the back of your head, spelling things out. It's important to remember. Respecting privacy. Learning to read between the lines a little bit. I think we do this more than we think we do. Just kind of taking social cues sometimes. You don't really want to tread on anybody's toes immediately, maybe giving it a little while before we start asking, bigger questions, especially with financials. But, trying to get our point across and trying to get the information we need without coming across as abrasive and a little much. Impressions, they always say you never get a second chance to make the first impression. So making sure that, of all the things we can control, we control them well. Making sure, we're coming in. And again, a lot of this is probably just, working a job. And so it's probably not going to be anything new. But hygiene, you're going to a farm, but maybe shower occasionally. Smell good, look presentable. Dress. I know when I go on a farm visit, boots and like WeatherTech pants maybe, and then I have an NRCS polo, but just something kind of basic, but something that is clean, but you can get dirty. And then respect, just the basic manners, being grateful for being there, and just treating it like almost like a job interview, a little bit more relaxed, but keeping in mind that, you are interacting with the public as a representative of conservation. So being prepared. So first of all, reading the land, understanding the operation and assessing the conservation needs and resource concerns. This will get easier the more experience you have and the more you get to kind of understand um, operations in general and landowners. But really kind of seeing what you can see with your senses as soon as you get there. And then utilizing your resources, doing your homework, making sure you come prepared, bring maps, any maps you need. Make sure you understand as much as the operation as you can before you get there. And I would very much stress, I mean, ask your coworkers questions. A lot of the people around you have been working in conservation for quite a long time, and it is astounding what they know. So for sure, don't be scared to ask them questions and see kind of what there is to learn. Ag is really a living science where it's always changing and innovating, and there's always more to learn. So I would stress that if you think you know everything, you do not. I know I am often blown away by how much I feel like there is to know, even when I do learn more. So just keeping that in mind. Knowing what we can do at NRCS. So try not to come in with, 2 or 3 practices or scenarios that you offer up each time and kind of get in a rut. Kind of try to think about what we offer and what really matches the producer, and try to stay current with the payment schedule and how we choose practices in Pennsylvania. That can change from year to year. And we're creating new scenarios and new practices, and we are adopting new scenarios and new practices in every year. So making sure that you know kind of what's out there and what we still have and what we can do is really important. So service, we are service. Being prompt and well prepared, so showing up on time, maybe showing up 5 or 10 minutes early, and making sure that you're really ready to go. You're not like, you're not just same idea, you're not thinking about other things. You're not having to kind of step away every few minutes. You're really there and ready to work. Becoming well-rounded. Again, knowing that you're never going to know everything, but maybe having a good working knowledge of everything or quite a few things, especially related to your operations. So if you're going on a dairy, there's probably going to be a few things that you're going to learn each time you go out, but having a good working knowledge of a dairy operation before you get there is a good idea and important. Phone calls and messages, being prompt and replying to those as soon as possible with reason. Don't like return a phone call if somebody calls you in the middle of you talking to a landowner. But also don't wait a week and then forget that that ever happened. I know sometimes emails and phone calls can get lost, but making sure we stay on top of that. Um, Speaking clearly and slowly. I know I struggle with this even right now. But making sure that we are really articulating it as well as possible, and we're making sure that the landowner is understanding what we're saying, and just kind of keeping that in mind. Sincere compliments, they can go a long way. If you are talking to a landowner and walking around the operation and they're already doing things that you think are great, making those compliments when they are sincere and well earned, but not necessarily going overboard and complimenting on anything and everything. I think we all know the difference between a sincere compliment and kissing butt, frankly. So I think keeping that in the back of our minds is important. Taking notes, super, super important. I'm definitely the kind of person where you can tell me something and I'll remember it. And I'll say, okay, great, I'll go do that. And then I'll turn around and someone will say something completely different and it will fly way out of my brain. So taking notes and making sure that they're the kind of notes that someone who was not the person who took the note, you, would be able to understand it later on. Because the last thing you want to do is have to call up a landowner once, twice, 3 times and get them to relate to you something that they told you or something that you wanted to remember when you could have just taken notes and had it a good record. So something to consider for sure. Being grateful, we are being invited onto someone's again, often home, business. So this is something to consider, that we are there as guests, and we're there on behalf of the government. So always being grateful, always saying thank you, please, thank you. It's the little things, in my opinion. I'm a big believer. I'm sure there's little things that people have done for us over the years that have made us feel incredible, and we've been very thankful for. So if it's, it might not be a big deal to you, but it will likely be a big deal to the landowner if it's memorable. So always remember that, and remembering that, it's your relationship with the landowner doesn't turn off as soon as you leave the farm or complete the contract. It really is something that is ongoing and doesn't have to be all consuming, but something that is not something that should just be turned off at the drop of a hat. Confrontation. So everyone's favorite thing. It is inevitable. It's likely going to happen. It happens in the workplace. It happens with landowners. It happens in every facet of our life. But making sure that we're, prepared for it. We recognize that it's going to happen, and it might seem like a big deal, but often it's just part of life. Making sure that we, as the conservation planners, are fully considering other options while remaining behind our convictions when necessary. So, kind of stepping back a little bit and thinking, all right, is this confrontation because am I being stubborn, or am I truly, do I truly feel that I'm just in the right here, and, we've just hit an impasse? So making sure that if there is other options to consider, that we hear those, we acknowledge them, but we stick to our convictions when necessary, and give good reasons for them. Being confident and assertive, but not arrogant and rude. I think we can all really tell the difference, but sometimes it's important to have that consciousness in the back of our heads, reminding us kind of what the difference is, especially when, we are struck with confrontation. Admitting mistakes as soon as we know that we've made them, and learning from them. It goes a long way, a sorry, and making sure that we relate to them, that we did not mean to do them harm. We didn't mean to lead them down the wrong path. We really just wanted to do our best, and we made a mistake. Everybody does it. But, trying to fix it, learning from it, and moving on. Staying professional and respectful, having a disagreement while, even if they don't stay professional and respectful, making sure that we do, and always having that, and continuing to self-improve and recognize opportunities for growth. They're always there. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's ever going to be. So just recognizing those paths to growth when they are applicable. So producer goal considerations. Just kind of a reiteration, don't go in with a set plan. Really go in, talk to the producer, talk to the objectives, look at the operation, and see what can be done for them, and not necessarily what you tend to do for producers in general. Listen to producer feedback. Active listening. I feel like most people have heard of it, but not sure if we are all really adopters of it. I mean, the amount of times we've been in, someone will be in a conversation and we'll be waiting to speak. We won't be really listening to what they're saying. So making sure that you're, listening, fully processing what they're saying, and not necessarily just waiting to say what we think is right. And staying humble with that. So realizing that just because you're fully firm in what you think and why you think what you think, sometimes that they have good reasons for what they think as well, and recognizing that as outside sources. Recognizing the decision maker's position. It is their final say in what happens on their own farm. And we can give them all the advice and all the guidance and all the science in the world, but they're going to do what they want to do at the end of the day, and what's best for them. And what their needs are, what their priorities are, what their preferences are. And really keeping that in mind when we're talking to them, and kind of what they're going to consider and what they're going to choose. Economic realities. So as the economist, you will be hearing from me in boot camp too, a little bit more about this, but considering that we can give them the best plan in the world, but if it isn't something that they can make happen economically, it's not going to happen. And that's something to consider heavily. Don't make any promises. We'll talk about this again, but making sure that we really reiterate that we can give them a plan and we can tell them what we think will happen, but nothing is set in stone. I'm sure we all know that the economy is all over the place. And prices have been high, costs have been high, and things happen. So making sure that they understand that and making sure we understand what their positions are as the decision makers. Farmer makes the final decision because they are the customer. We are a service and we are providing a service to them. So making sure we understand that they are going to make that final decision and it's going to be their decision. So sustainability. So this is all really important because the best conservation is long-term. If it's not sustainable to the farmer, it won't be sustainable at all. So that's really the goal is, we have a farmer put in a conservation plan, conservation system, and they realize past this system that, it is sustainable and it is something that they want to keep doing for conservation itself. So something that we want to do is really encourage them to do this long term and something that's really going to work for them. And remembering that what we may consider to be the right or wrong answer is not always that for the producer. So we can't tell them what to do. We can't tell them anything that they are not going to agree with. So really making sure that we consider that. And then making sure that we realize that our impression also does impact how they make their decisions with conservation. So just watching what we can control and hopefully making their conservation last. And I love to read. So this is one of my favorite authors, Maya Angelou. But she said, at the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did. They will remember how you made them feel. So, that's really important, I think, as we interact with other people, recognizing that how we interact is maybe as big a deal, if not a bigger deal, than what we say to people, and keeping that in mind for sure. So that's really what I have today. Thank you very much. Feel free to email me if any questions come up, but I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has right now.
Great, Mary Lynn, thank you. I
Oh,
have
sharing.
a poll question. I'm gonna put it in the chat and
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back to polls and launch it here. It's loading, bear with
Okay.
me. And the question is, when should conservation planners be expected to interact with landowners and other members of the public? A, only during farm visits. B, only when they come into I can't see the whole thing. Only when they come into the office, meetings and events. And C, never. Or did I miss one there?
I think there was another one.
Oh, there was. Only A, only during farm visits. B, only when they come into the office. C, through correspondence, farm visits, office meetings and events. And D, never. Sorry for that's the second one I messed up. I apologize.
Should I launch that poll? Oh, you got it. Okay.
Lots of responses coming in, Mary Lynn. Good people are listening.
Cool. Cool. Yes, that is true. Yes. Perfect. 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 I love it. I lost that poll, but C is the right answer. Should have been, let me scroll. Yes, correspondence, farm visits, office meetings, and events. So great job. Thanks for listening, you guys. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, but I really appreciate being here today.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. And for those that continue with Boot Camp 2, which I hope is everyone, you'll get to hear from Mary Lynn again next year or whenever you do attend down the road. All right, our last presentation for our virtual sessions, we're jumping back to Yuri Plowden. So Yuri's going to talk to us about wetland awareness, and that's going to wrap it up for us today. So Yuri, all yours.
Yes. Yep. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Yep. And I see your presentation.
Okay, let me just get some other things up here. Okay, great. So, yeah, you're on the home stretch. Maybe stand up at wherever you are, stretch a little bit, and get your brain cells engaged for this last one. It's an important one. They're all important. I think it was very pertinent to have this come after Mary Lynn's talk, because wetlands can make landowners see red, because there's all kinds of regulations and stuff surrounding wetlands. So your job as the planner is to have enough knowledge to be aware that a wetland might be present. You may not be able to be 100% sure that it's a wetland, but at least after this presentation, you should have enough to at least be able to look at an area and say something's different, maybe something's going on, we need to pay attention. So this was a presentation that was developed by Jim Gillis, who is our former state biologist. So I'm filling in until we get a permanent full-time biologist. Beth Sassaman, you heard from her earlier, but of course, as a soil scientist and with the Resource Soil Scientist cadre, we do a lot with wetlands. Okay. So these are the things that we're going to go over in this presentation the next half hour to 40 minutes or so. So what are wetlands? There are 3 criteria: hydrology, which means water, hydric soils, and hydrophytic plants. So these are soils that formed in wetlands and plants that grow in wetlands. So we'll cover who cares about wetlands and why do we care about wetlands, how do we identify them, and how do we deal with them. Okay, so what are wetlands? Well, just like their name says, they are wet land, and the land portion is vital to this definition. So for example, this pond, the pond itself is not considered a wetland. Why? Because it has the hydrology, maybe there's hydric soils, but within the center of the pond, there aren't plants growing. Now there's probably wetlands around this rim where you have all 3 criteria, but the pond itself and many ponds are not considered necessarily wetlands. And then this bottom, this is a wetland. You can see it's smushy, it looks wet. If you see something like that, it should raise a flag for you. Okay, so what are wetlands? So the areas that need to show all 3 of the following. So you have to have wetland hydrology. So you have to have a source of water, and there's all kinds of regulatory definitions. Hydrology during the growing season, during the wettest part of the growing season, you have hydrology. Then you need to have hydric soils, and those are soils that formed under conditions of saturation long enough to develop anaerobic conditions. That's like a regulatory definition of hydric soils. And then hydrophytic plants are plants that grow in hydric soils in conditions of saturation. If you have all 3 where they intersect, you have a wetland. Now, you might be in a situation where you have a hydric soil. And remember, in my first presentation, there was a picture of a soil that had gray and orange mottles. And many of you correctly identified that as being a sign of wetness. So you might have a hydric soil, but you don't have a wetland. Why would that be? And that's because the character, once the soil is hydric, it's considered always hydric because it's formed under conditions of saturation. But then let's say it's subsequently been drained or something happened to the topography and now it's no longer wet. The soils are still considered hydric soils because they formed under hydric conditions, but it's not wetland. Similarly, you might have hydrology, but maybe it's not long lasting enough to actually develop the other 2 parameters with it. Or it might be a pond, like we said, or a river. You have plenty of water there, but it's not considered a wetland that's regulated. And then you have hydrophytic plants. Again, hydrophytic plants can lie because you could have an upland plant growing in a wet area. You could have a wet plant growing in a somewhat dry area. They move around. And so that's why you need to have all three of those parameters to have an actual wetland. Okay, so hydrology, you have water that saturates the soil, hydric soils, often enough and long enough to create noticeably different plant communities. So we have two pictures here, this one on the left and this one on the right. I will tell you now, there are wetlands in each of those. So anybody take a guess on the one on the left? Can you tell that there's a difference, first of all? You can see that there's woodland up here, and then something different is going down here. What are these plants? Some of you might know right off the top of your heads. You can put it in the chat. Yes. Yep. I see people putting in. Yes. Skunk cabbage. And what do we know about skunk cabbage? It likes it to be wet. And then, so this is like a woodland condition. Over here, this is an actual crop field. And we definitely have an area of concern. We have a low area that has ponding. It has water in it. It has stressed vegetation. Whoops. Sorry, I meant to do this. Wait a minute. It was supposed to outline what the wetland areas are. Sorry. So this area of skunk cabbage is the wetland area. And this area down here with the puddle, that is a wetland area. Okay, who cares about wetlands? Tree huggers, yep. Environmentalists, biologists, regulatory agencies like DEP, the Army Corps of Engineers. Yeah, they care about wetlands. But who cares about wetlands after they're gone? So hunters, flood victims, drought-prone areas, etc., and everyone who relies on groundwater. So in other words, all of us. Because what happens if wetlands are drained and nuked? Basically, the wetlands are a good overflow area for flooding. And so where you remove the wetlands, all that water that would normally go into the wetland now stays in the river or the stream, and that makes the erosive power and the power of the water that much greater. And so everybody downstream of someone who's drained a wetland will suffer for that. So where does groundwater recharge occur? Do we think it occurs in the pond? Not really. It actually occurs over in that grassy area on the left where the wetland is. All right, so we know about people that care about wetlands, but why do we, as conservationists, as NRCS employees, as conservation district employees, as agency employees, why do we care? Because it is our job. They're natural resources that provide public benefits like groundwater recharge, water quality, infiltration and filtration, flood absorption, wildlife habitat, and it's the law. And it is the only landform that's protected by law. And some of the laws are the NEPA and Food Security Act, Executive Order 11990, et cetera, and it's part of our NRCS technical policy. And I think Dan Ludwig talked about some of those laws in the first day. So how do we identify wetlands? So there are professional wetland specialists, that's all they do. And we have a wetland cadre among NRCS that's made up of some SolCons that have really good plant skills. All of our resource soil scientists are part of the wetland cadre, and our state biologist is usually involved. And our technical resource cons usually have training and knowledge about how to identify wetlands. And we use the Food Security Act and the Army Corps of Engineer manuals, and those folks will have a ton of other additional training and expertise. And part of that is there's the technical aspect of identifying a wetland, but then there's understanding all the policy and regs and NRCS and USDA policy. So that's why the wetland cadre just has a lot of training about that. But don't just outsource your wetland identification to the cadre exclusively. Everyone has the capability to recognize wetlands by asking and answering 2 simple questions. Is this area different from its surroundings? And if so, what makes it different? And if you're not sure, I would definitely call in a cadre member. I'd definitely call your resource soil scientist, but you're the first one out on the land looking. And if you recognize something fishy, you want to investigate further. Okay, so we talked about this. Water saturates the soil often enough and long enough to create noticeably different plant community. So you see the different skunk cabbage, and then you see on the left and you see on the right that low area, you have stressed vegetation, you have a different landform, something's going on. So that's the wetland there. Wet soils, skunk cabbage, no woody vegetation. And then here's the wetland area over here. Ponding, crop failure. Okay. So again, 1, is an area different from surroundings? And 2, what makes it different? So if the water saturates the soil often enough and long enough, it will create noticeably different plant communities. So do you guys notice any difference here? I see here's our corn crop field over here. This looks like grass, some bare soil. Maybe this is a little bit of a heavier use area. And then in the forefront, here's some grassy area that looks very mucked up, like looks like cow hooves or something pressing down into the soil. And then we see this very distinct plant community here in the middle. So indeed, that is definitely a wetland. You have cattails and sedges, and the livestock are avoiding it. This forefront area could also be marginal wetland also, because it clearly looks very wet to me. Okay, again, is an area different from its surroundings, and what makes it different? Do you guys see a wetland in here? Again, water saturates the soil often enough and long enough to create noticeably different plant communities. There's definitely something going on here. You see this swatch of green, something different. Maybe it's reed canary grass. You have your crop over here, you have some other brush over here, and the landscape, it's very flat. In my first presentation, I talked about convergent landscapes where water is going to collect here. All these things are good clues that probably something's going on in there. This could be a wetland. Okay, wet soils, reed canary grass, no woody plants. The farmer is avoiding it. So even if you don't know for sure that an area is a wetland, you can recognize that it's different and then treat it differently. So how do we deal with wetlands? First of all, we have to avoid negative impacts first and foremost. Then, if impacts can be avoided, we do what it takes to avoid them, period. Just avoid them. So that might mean that you have to change the practices, change your practice layouts, etc. So if you can avoid it, even if it's not what the farmer initially wanted, it's part of your job to explain and talk, and that's where all of the things that Mary Lynn talked about in the previous presentation really come into play, because you're potentially giving them information that they don't want to hear. Now, when negative impacts are unavoidable, then we minimize the impacts and to get appropriate permits if necessary. So unavoidable means avoidance is not possible. So not preferred by the farmer is not the same as not possible. Okay, so along that theme of not preferred is not the same as not possible. So where should a gravity trough go? If you look at this area, where do you think it should go? First of all, do you notice anything different? This was the, is something different going on here? I would say that yes, this looks like a wet area. The vegetation is different. It looks different. Looks like it's been mucked up by hooves because of wet soils. And then over here, though, the grass is nice. It looks pretty dry. So put the gravity trough over here where it's dry and not here in the potential wetland. Again, this might not be where the farmer might not prefer to have it up here, but that's not the same as it's not possible to have it up here. So we are avoiding the wetland. It is possible to avoid the wetland, so we avoid it. Okay, again, not preferred does not equal not possible. So where should the animal trail go? So it's possible that the farmer, here's the barn, and here's the gate, or you want the animals to go through and get to this barn. So the farmer might want to put it way over here, right? That's where they would prefer to put it. But what do you notice? Again, something looks different here. We've got, it looks like we might even have a little bit of sedges, definitely something different's going on there. So this may be the preferred path, this arrow here, but this is the path that it should go because this avoids the wetland completely. Okay, so to summarize, what are wetlands? We have the 3 criteria. It has to have hydrology, hydric soils, and hydrophytic plants. Now, there are areas where, of course, in ag settings, often you won't have the hydrophytic plants, right? Because maybe they've been herbicided in order to make way for pasture grasses or something else. So sometimes you might only have, if you only have 2 of the 3, that's sometimes where you often should rely on your cadre to come out, because there's different procedures that we use to still determine if a wetland's present, even if not all the 3 criteria are there. Who cares about wetlands? We do. They are important resources that provide a lot of ecosystem services, and it's the law. And how do we identify wetlands? How, as you, as conservation planners, you're the first ones out on the site. How do you identify it? Well, does the area look different than everything else, and why? And then how do we deal with wetlands? We avoid them. We avoid them, we avoid them, we avoid them. And if we can't avoid them, then we minimize the impact, and we minimize any negative impacts. So that's it. I'm getting you guys out of here early. And there's my contact information if you have any other questions about wetlands or soils. And again, you can also talk to your area's technical resource con and to the resource soil scientist in your area, and maybe learn who the wetland cadre are in your area also. Okay, I think
and
Kim's going to
just launched the poll, and the question is, which of the following does not occur in natural wetlands? More than one may apply. Water infiltration / groundwater recharge, water quality improvement, surface water retention and absorption, mosquito propagation, West Nile virus dispersal, floodwater entrapment and dispersal, loss of valuable productive farmland, habitat variety of plants and animals, landscape connectivity, water corridors.
This is definitely a Jim Gillis poll question for those of you that know him. All right, I'm seeing, come on, folks in the chat. I guess that was a lot. Do you want to read them again, or you put it in the chat? I
did put it in the chat. I can read it again.
Yeah.
Which of the following does not occur in natural wetlands. More than one may apply. You could say A is water infiltration / groundwater recharge. B is water quality improvement. C is surface water retention and absorption. D is mosquito propagation / West Nile virus dispersal. D is floodwater entrapment and dispersal. E is loss of valuable productive farmland. F is habitat for a variety of plants and animals. And G is landscape connectivity water corridors. Which one does not occur in natural wetlands? We threw you some softball questions earlier, and this is not one of them, so.
All right, I only see 24 responses. I don't see anything in the chat. A little bit tricky. It's one of those negative, which I find does not occur in a natural wetland. Got 28. Well, come on, folks. So as we're going through this, so water infiltration and groundwater recharge, does that occur in a natural wetland? And yes, that does occur in a natural wetland. Although somebody did respond, that does not occur. So we're looking at things that do not occur in natural wetlands. Okay, water quality improvement, that does occur in natural wetlands. All right, the responses are still coming in slowly as I move down the list. Surface water retention and absorption, yes, that occurs in natural wetlands. It does. All right. Mosquito propagation and West Nile virus dispersal. That actually, in a good, healthy wetland, that is not as likely to occur. Because why? And I think it might have to do with some of Beth's presentation. When you have a diverse habitat, a healthy habitat, you have a diversity of predators and prey, and you have predators on those mosquitoes. And so contrary to popular belief, when people think wetlands it's going to be just one big mosquito breeding ground. Actually, if it's a healthy wetland and it has a good population of lots of different things, you'll have predators of mosquitoes as well as the mosquitoes themselves. All right, floodwater entrapment and dispersal. That floodwater entrapment dispersal does occur in natural wetlands. We are looking for things that do not. Now, here's where I think this was definitely a Jim Gillis tricky one, and I think I may have entered this into the poll wrong, because those of you who checked this, you are correct. Loss of valuable and productive farmland does not occur in wetlands, because wetlands are marginal land. And so you would have to do a lot of engineering practices to drain that land and make it productive. So that's sort of a Jim Gillis question that those of you who answered that you were correct, even though the poll might say it's wrong. I think it was entered wrong in the poll. Okay, and then wetlands are a habitat for a variety of plants and animals, and they do serve as landscape connectivity for water corridors. All righty.
Very good. Thank you very much, Yuri. We appreciate it. We will get to work with Yuri in boot camp 2. So once again, those that come back to see Mary Lynn will also see Yuri at boot camp 2. I have one concluding request. I put a link in the chat for a survey regarding today's virtual presentations, and just like the one this morning, if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to fill that out so that we can take those responses and tweak this course to make it better, more effective for future offerings. And with that does conclude our virtual training. These presentations will be available. We'll get them out to you via a web link, and then we'll have the recordings at the same web page. And we will look forward to seeing everybody in person. This gives a nice overview, and we're going to hit some of the concepts home in the in-person, but I hope that you're getting to gain a perspective for the type of topics that we're hitting, and I hope that you're getting to learn some of the instructors and resources and people and places and items that you can go to get help. I have one of my coworkers always says it's not what you know, it's who you know and how do you go to get the answers. And so I think that's very appropriate. So with that, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing half of you on Monday and the other half the first week of May. And enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks a lot.